Let's jump right in. You know that incredible feeling when you check your bank account and instead of immediately closing the app in pure panic, you actually smile? When you finally stop calculating whether buying groceries means you're eating ramen for the rest of the week? Well, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to break down the exact mathematical and psychological point where that shift actually happens. Now, most of the financial gurus out there, they'll tell you that you need a six-figure salary or a cool $1 million in the bank to finally feel wealthy and secure. But honestly, they're missing something massive. There is a much smaller, highly specific financial milestone that completely transforms your relationship with money. And the crazy thing is, once you hit it, the mechanics of wealth building change forever. So I want to pose this question directly to you right up front. When you picture building wealth, what do you actually see? Do you imagine some trust fund kid who never had to worry about a bill? Or maybe someone just grinding away for 40 years, slowly and painfully hoarding cash $1 at a time? Look, the truth is, wealth building just doesn't work the way most of us are taught. It's not this slow, linear grind all the way to $1 million. So, what if the secret to unlocking wealth isn't $1 million at all? What if the real turning point is sitting right in front of you, but you just haven't been looking for it? See, there's this massive gap between the $1 million myth, the idea that you aren't financially secure until you hit seven figures, and the $20,000 reality. It turns out there are these specific financial thresholds that act almost like invisible barriers in our lives, and once you cross them, the rules of the game completely change. $20,000 is that first major threshold. It's literally the dividing line that separates those who will go on to build life-changing wealth from those who will spend their entire lives trapped in that exhausting paycheck-to-paycheck cycle. And the absolute wildest part? Most people have zero idea this invisible barrier even exists. To really get a feel for this, think about it like pushing a massive, heavy boulder up a steep hill. You know that just getting the thing to budge is the hardest part. You're straining, you're sweating, you're making barely any progress, and honestly, you're probably questioning if it's even worth it. Well, everything before you save your first $20,000 feels exactly like that. It's like you are pushing a giant financial boulder uphill, fighting against gravity every single step of the way. But the moment you hit $20,000, it's like that boulder finally crests the top of the hill. Suddenly, gravity is actually working in your favor, and it just starts rolling down the other side almost effortlessly. But why does this happen? Well, it turns out it's not just about the math. The hidden psychology of being broke is incredibly powerful. When you don't have money saved, your brain basically operates in what psychologists call survival mode. In this state, every single financial decision you make is filtered through fear and scarcity. You know the feeling, right? You end up taking the very first job offer that comes along, even if it's a terrible fit just because you can't afford to be picky. You stay in toxic situations because leaving feels way too risky. You are literally incapable of thinking about long-term growth or opportunity because your mental bandwidth is entirely consumed by immediate, pressing threats. It's kind of like trying to peacefully plan a tropical beach vacation while your living room is actively on fire. But let's look at how quickly we can start putting out that fire. Research from Vanguard reveals something absolutely incredible. Having just $2,000 in emergency savings increases your financial well-being by a massive 21%. $2,000. That's less than what a lot of people spend on a weekend getaway or a fancy new laptop. But that relatively small financial buffer, it creates a massive psychological shift. Why? Because it's the absolute bare minimum required to pull your brain out of pure panicked survival mode. Now, let's take it to the next level and see how this builds. When you push that initial emergency fund up to cover, say, 3 to 6 months of living expenses, which for most people lands right around that magical $20,000 mark, you get an additional 13% boost in financial well-being. But honestly, more importantly than the percentage, you have now created enough psychological breathing room for your brain to completely shift gears. You finally stop asking, how do I just survive until Friday? And you start asking, how can I grow this money? You completely pivot from wealth preservation into wealth building. So the really crucial point here is how this mindset shift accelerates the math. Let's say you're aggressively saving $1,000 every single month and earning an 8% return on your investments. Getting to your first $20,000 takes about 19 grueling months of consistent saving, intense discipline, and delayed gratification. But your second $20,000? That doesn't take another 19 months. It only takes 17 months. You did the exact same amount of work, but you shaved 2 full months off the timeline just because your first $20,000 is now actively working alongside you. And get this, by the time your portfolio hits $400,000, generating your next $20,000 takes just 5 months. The acceleration becomes almost comical.
You might be sitting there thinking that wealthy people have access to exclusive hedge funds or some secret investment strategy, but honestly, it's just basic mathematics. Look, a 10% return on a $2,000 investment gives you $200. It's nice, for sure, but it's not life-changing. Up until the $20,000 mark, your investment returns can feel kind of insignificant. But apply that exact same 10% growth rate with the exact same index funds and the exact same level of risk to $20,000, and boom, it yields $2,000. Suddenly, you have real, tangible money flowing into your account over the course of a year without you having to lift a single finger. Scale is exactly what transforms small percentage wins into life-changing absolute numbers. But if we're being honest, the math isn't even the most important part of this whole equation. When you save $20,000 starting from absolute zero, you have accomplished something far more valuable than just hoarding some cash. You have fundamentally rewired your brain. Think about the shared discipline required to do this. You had to track every dollar, you had to say no to shiny objects, and you had to do it consistently for months, maybe even years. You essentially proved to yourself that you can control your money instead of letting it control you. You became a person who can successfully delay gratification. That is a massive identity shift, and it's a crucial life skill that completely changes every financial decision you make from here on out. And this identity shift plays out dramatically in the real world. When you're living paycheck to paycheck, a broken laptop, a sudden car repair, or a rent hike, those are absolute disasters. They are full-blown financial emergencies that derail your entire month, maybe even your year. But when you have $20,000 sitting in the bank, those exact same events transform into minor inconveniences. Your car needs repairs, annoying, sure, but not catastrophic. Your laptop dies, well, time to upgrade. You literally stop sweating the small stuff because you've built a rock-solid foundation that can absorb the shocks of everyday life. What's more, you start seeing opportunities instead of just constantly scanning for threats. Having cold, hard cash on hand unlocks doors you previously had to just walk right past. When a friend mentions they're starting a business, you can actually consider investing $5,000 instead of just wishing them good luck. When a killer deal on a rental property pops up on Zillow, you can actually run the numbers instead of just scrolling past in envy. If there's a career-boosting conference your company refuses to pay for, you can just buy the ticket yourself, knowing the return on investment will easily pay off down the road. This is exactly what people mean when they say money goes to money. Having cash gives you options, and options create more opportunities to make even more money. As you build out this foundation, something else remarkable happens. You completely stop caring about micro decisions. When you're broke, you obsess over whether to buy the generic cereal, if you should get premium gas, or if you can really afford that $3 coffee. Every single dollar feels overwhelmingly precious. But with $20,000 in the bank, you realize these micro decisions are largely irrelevant to your long-term future. A $3 coffee is not going to break you. This incredibly liberating realization frees up your mental energy to focus entirely on the macro decisions, optimizing your housing costs, maximizing your income, refining your investment strategy. These are the big choices that actually swing your net worth by tens of thousands of dollars. Now, let's take a look at how this impacts your 9-to-5. $20,000 doesn't just change your relationship with money, it completely alters your relationship with work. It gives you what we call walking away money. When you live paycheck to paycheck, you're trapped. You can't speak up because you desperately need the very next paycheck just to keep the lights on. But when you have enough cash to survive for months without working a single day, everything changes. You are no longer negotiating from a place of fear and desperation. You are negotiating from a position of absolute strength and deep confidence. Because you aren't terrified of being fired into poverty, a totally new positive feedback loop begins in your workplace. You confidently ask for the raise you know you deserve. You calmly push back on unreasonable requests from your boss. You explore new opportunities because, hey, you can afford to take some risks. And here is the truly crazy part. Often, you don't even need to quit. Just having the money changes your entire demeanor. You become more assertive, more willing to tackle big challenges. People notice this new confidence, which naturally leads to better assignments, more recognition, and ultimately even more money. It accelerates your wealth building exponentially. But right as things are going perfectly, we arrive at the absolute most dangerous moment in this entire journey, the wealth trap. I see this happen constantly, you guys. Someone works incredibly hard. They hit that magical $20,000 mark. They feel that amazing psychological shift of freedom, and then they immediately blow it. They convince themselves they deserve a reward for being so disciplined, so they drop it on a ridiculously expensive vacation, or they use it as a down payment on a house they can't truly afford, or worst of all, they buy a flashy new car. We have to fiercely protect that foundation. This money is not a reward to be spent. It is the vital seed for your future generational wealth.
Let's single out the car issue for a second because it is easily the biggest wealth destroyer out there. Between massive car payments, insurance, maintenance, and gas, the average person drops $600 to $800 every single month just on transportation. Over a 40-year working period, that adds up to easily $400,000 just to get from point A to point B. Meanwhile, these exact same people are stressed out, worried they can't afford to save for retirement. You are literally spending a fortune on a depreciating asset while sacrificing your own financial independence.
And to make matters even worse, the very moment you drive a shiny new car off the dealer's lot, it loses roughly 20% of its value. Think about what that actually means in the real world. You are not just spending your hard-earned money, you are actively destroying your own wealth. Your money is literally evaporating into thin air the second those tires hit the street, rather than multiplying safely in an investment account. This brings us to the ultimate concept here: opportunity cost. Having your $20,000 foundation completely changes how you view major purchases. You stop asking, can I afford the monthly payment? And you start asking, what is this really costing my future self? That $30,000 new car isn't just $30,000. If you took that same money and invested it over 20 years, it could grow to over $200,000. Suddenly, choosing to drive an older, reliable Honda doesn't feel like a sacrifice at all, does it? It feels like a highly strategic choice to fund your future freedom. The person in the flashy new car is probably stressed to the max about money, while the person in the older car is quietly building immense wealth and sleeping beautifully at night. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final, vital question. Look, $20,000 isn't going to make you rich overnight, but it is the invisible barrier that fundamentally changes how you think about money, about opportunity, and about your own life. It is the literal difference between merely surviving and truly thriving, between constantly reacting to life's emergencies and proactively designing the exact life you want. Your future self is counting on the financial decisions you are making right now. So, will you fall into the wealth trap, or will you start building your unshakable foundation today? What will you choose?